Alright, and we are rolling, I believe. Good morning, afternoon, and or evening, ladies and gentlemen. Here it finally is, part 2 of the 99 Super Bowl. Yeah, that's about it. I don't have any Rams jerseys, so just repping Domantas Sabonis. It's blue and yellow, it's close enough. Anyway, let's get right into it. Shout out to Domantas Sabonis, I guess. Dude's been a beast. And I'd like to say thank you to all the new subs. I went from like 16 to 29 in one day, even though I hadn't uploaded in like a week. But without further ado, roll the intro.
I don't really have a good intro right now, but on this channel I like to talk sports.
Now this Rams team is one everyone knows a good bit about from this era. The greatest show on turf. Kurt Warner, Marshall Faulk, Isaac Bruce, and Torrey Holt. All the offensive firepower they could ask for. But there is a lot of context missing from all of these names, which this video is of course going to be all about. So let's start with the first major name, the one that should come to mind when you think of this team. Dick Vermeil. Vermeil's coaching career was a strange one. He would get his first job in 1976 as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. This Eagles team was not good at all. The worst part about it being they didn't have a first-round draft pick for the next 3 years due to prior trades. However, with Vermeil's coaching, the team would rally and make the playoffs in 1978. They didn't go very far, but this was the first time the Eagles had even made the postseason in 18 years. The Eagles would be on a steady upwards trajectory from there, up until 1983, where they ended up making the Super Bowl to face the Oakland Raiders. It didn't go well. The Eagles would lose 27-10. Then, shockingly, after that Super Bowl defeat, Vermeil would retire from coaching. He cited burnout, essentially, and a lack of love for coaching and a lack of passion for the game. After that, Vermeil would become a broadcaster for both CBS and ABC, and do so for the next 15 odd years. In fact, in 1994, the Eagles actually inquired into bringing Vermeil back as their coach, but the two sides couldn't come to an agreement on contracts and control. Vermeil's coaching return would not be for another 3 years, 1997, when he would come out of retirement for, of course, the St. Louis Rams. The Rams were bad, but they weren't all bad, just mostly bad. Their best player probably at the time of Vermeil's arrival was wide receiver Isaac Bruce. Bruce was coming off of a very, very good year where he had 1,338 yards and 7 touchdowns and made a Pro Bowl. However, though, the lack of success really hampered him. The team's lack of success, that is. Because the year before 97, Bruce had one of the greatest receiving seasons of all time. In 1995, Bruce had 119 receptions for 1,781 yards and 13 touchdowns. At the time, 1,781 yards was the second most in the season, behind Jerry Rice's 1,848. It still ranks as the 5th most receiving yards in the season now. Bruce would also set Rams franchise records for most receptions in a season, yards in a season, 100-yard games in a season, and consecutive 100-yard games in a season. Fun fact, he also won Special Teams Player of the Week for the NFC in Week 1 after he blocked a punt. Bruce was obviously the feature guy on the offense, but the rest of said offense needed a lot of work. In the 97 season, they were 5-11 that year. Besides Bruce, their offense was mostly tepid. Veteran journeyman Tony Banks was at the head for quarterback, throwing for 3,200 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. Except against the run, where their defense gave up the 6th least rushing yards and 3rd least rushing touchdowns that year. They would go into the 98 season with the 6th overall pick in the draft, and select defensive end Grant Wistrom from Nebraska. Wistrom would put together a very, very solid NFL career, including an 11-sack season in 2000, but he was far from the billing, let's say. However, in the 4th round of the draft, they would pick up a game changer for them that would be a critical part of the teams to come. Zahir Hakeem, wide receiver from San Diego State. Hakeem would be a very good number 3 wideout for the team, but his real strengths came in the return game, where he was an absolute monster. In his first ever year as a punt returner, which was 99, he would compile 1,200 all-purpose yards and an 84-yard return for a touchdown. However, their quarterback room was still suspect, to say the very, very least. And to add some competition to their QB room, and to just have some depth at the position in general, they would call up a certain man from NFL Europe to be their new third stringer, Kurt Warner. Warner's career is the stuff of NFL legend. In college, Warner quarterbacked for the University of Northern Iowa, an FCS school. He would go undrafted in 1994, and after a cup of coffee in the Green Bay Packers training camp, seemed to be out of it all. He began working as a grocery store clerk for $5.50 an hour. However, his pro football career was not over, as he would be trying out for the Iowa Barnstormers of the AFL, the Arena Football League, and would see a lot of success. He would be named to 2 back-to-back first-team All-Arenas in 96 and 97 after leading the Barnstormers to back-to-back Arena Bowl title appearances. After a tryout he had with the Bears was canceled due to a spider bite he got on his elbow during his honeymoon, Warner would have a tryout for the St. Louis Rams. He would impress enough to sign a futures contract with the team and be sent over to NFL Europe to the Amsterdam Admiral. Warner would impress that year. He would lead NFL Europe in both touchdowns and passing yards, so much so that he would be promoted to the team's third-string quarterback before the 98 season started. Competition was veteran aging backup Steve Bono and the starter, which was still Tony Banks. Warner would barely see any playing time in 98, and the team was not good, finishing 4-12. Their running game, which wasn't great the year prior, got worse. Banks started in 14 games that season, throwing 7 touchdowns compared to 14 interceptions. Their leading receiver that year would be Ricky Prohl, who had 771 yards and 3 touchdowns because Isaac Bruce got injured and only played in 5 games. Their defense was not fantastic, however a 12-sack performance from linebacker Kevin Carter is nothing to scoff at. They were actually fairly good at getting to the passer that season. However, the lack of turnovers on the team, plus the stagnant offense, meant that they could never capitalize on those momentum swings. They would go into this offseason with the plan to overhaul everything, because it was clear nothing was working from the year prior. They would start by firing their offensive coordinator, Jerry Rome, and replacing him with one Mike Martz, who would become very important to the story later on. Then with the 6th overall pick in the draft, they would select Torrey Holt, wide receiver from NC State. Of course, Holt would become a legend for the Rams. However, this would be his rookie year. He would see the field a lot, but he wasn't the Torrey Holt we all know and love. Then they would go out and try and find the answer to their run game problems. And they would. Running back Marshall Faulk. After a wildly successful career at San Diego State and running a 4.35 at his pro day, Faulk would be taken 2nd overall in the 1994 NFL Draft by the Indianapolis Colts, who were in desperate need of any sort of run game. Faulk would deliver, rushing for 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns in his rookie year, adding on 522 yards and a receiving touchdown. He would of course continue that production without a beat, as only once in his 4 years in Indy did he not crack 1,000 yards rushing. In fact, the year before he made his way to St. Louis, he had 1,319 yards rushing, 6 rushing touchdowns, 908 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. Faulk's breakup with the Colts came down to the one thing it usually does: money. He had been signed to a 7-year, $17.2 million deal as a rookie, but he felt he deserved more due to his production. Faulk even threatened to hold out of training camp, which really rubbed Colts president Bill Polian the wrong way. He wanted Faulk out of there because he thought the holdout would damage the culture he was trying to build, and he didn't want that presence around the young guys of the team. Marshall Faulk would be traded to the Rams at the low price of only a 2nd and a 5th round pick. He would still end up holding out, but only for 12 days, however, before the Rams signed him to a 7-year, $45 million contract. Despite all that, the quarterback position with them was still spotty at best, and so they would make a move to sign veteran Trent Green to be their slated starter for the year. This would take us all the way down to preseason of the 99 year, and the Rams would start off certainly on the wrong foot, as Trent Green, in one of the first plays in preseason for the team, would tear his ACL. He would be done for the year before it even began. In a very famous moment throughout NFL history, a press conference after the Rams had disclosed Green's injury information was headlined by one Dick Vermeil, who, close to tears, said one little statement that proved very, very true. "We will rally around Kurt Warner," who was the backup at the time, "and we will play good football." And you know what? He was absolutely right. Let's talk about the greatest show on turf, finally. The first bump to this offensive machine came with their OC, Mike Martz. Martz's system, which he had learned under the legendary Don Coryell, was very, very pass-happy. Kurt Warner, who had a very, very big arm and was more than willing to take deep shots, was a great fit, to be honest, and that would be proven later on that year. Marshall Faulk was a weapon unlike few the NFL has ever seen in both the rushing and the receiving games. Isaac Bruce was Isaac Bruce, and Torrey Holt was a supreme talent. And besides all that, their offensive line was a brick wall, headlined by the one, the only Orlando Pace, who I really should have touched on, but I kind of forgot to. I apologize, Orlando Pace. I'll probably, you know what? Make this up. Starting right now, this will be like episode 2.5, I'm doing a video on Orlando Pace. Hold me to that. Besides all that, their depth at receiver was still very, very solid. Oz Hakeem was a take-the-top-off level deep threat with Corvette speed, and Ricky Prohl was a dependable, get-open, clutch-catches slot guy. The Rams had a million ways to kill you, and they would use all of them that season. The team's high-powered offense would roll over most of their competition. They would go 13-3 that year. Ironically, one of their losses came to the Titans in Week 8 of that season. After that Week 8 loss, they would lose to the Lions in Week 9, but then they were soon back to their winning ways. The final loss of the year would come in Week 17, after they had already clinched a playoff berth and they were resting some of their starters. This team put up offensive numbers that were absolutely ridiculous, even by today's high-powered standards in the NFL. Kurt Warner would throw for 4,353 yards, 41 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. Marshall Faulk would have 2,429 yards from scrimmage, an NFL record until Chris Johnson broke it in 2009. Faulk would also be the first player ever to have over 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 receiving in a single season. He would have 12 total touchdowns, 7 rushing and 5 receiving, and was second on the team in receiving yards and led the team in receptions with 87. Through the air, Isaac Bruce would have 77 receptions for 1,165 yards and 12 touchdowns, averaging 15 yards per catch. A rookie Torrey Holt would have 788 yards and 6 touchdowns. Oz Hakeem grabbed 677 yards and 8 touchdowns with almost 19 yards per reception, while also picking up a punt return touchdown. The Rams were first in the league with passing yards with 4,580, yards per pass attempt with 8.64, passing touchdowns with 41, total offensive yards 6,639, along with leading the league in yards per game with 400.8, passing yards per game with 272.1, and points per game with 32.5. They scored a total of 526 points that year, which was a team record. Even with that offensive dominance, their defense would still be much improved over years prior. Kevin Carter would have 17 sacks that season. Cornerback Todd Light would have 6 picks, while cornerback Dexter McCleon and Mike Jones would be second on the team with 4 each. This team was as high-powered as they would come. They would go into the playoffs with a first-round bye and go and face the 10-6 Minnesota Vikings in the divisional round of the playoffs. Now, this Vikings team, despite their record, was not an inferior one. This was the team that had only 1 year previous gone 15-1 and made the Nfc Championship. An aging but effective Randall Cunningham was still their slated starter, one of the greatest receiving duos of all time with Randy Moss and Chris Carter, along with a stout defense, headlined by the one and only John Randall. That year for the Vikings, though, would be more up and down than the previous one. Randall Cunningham would in fact be benched after they started the year 2-4 and he didn't play well, for veteran backup and legendary draft bust Jeff George. George would actually do very well. He would guide the team to an 8-2 record, hence the 10-6 finish, and their first playoff victory of the year, beating out the Cowboys 27-10 in the wildcard round, setting up for a shootout of the ages most likely with the Rams, as both teams' offenses were incredibly high-powered. And the game would certainly see a lot of scoring. Minnesota would get the ball first, driving 60 yards in 11 plays, but only getting a field goal for their troubles. The Rams would then get the ball, and on their first play from scrimmage, Warner threw a 77-yard touchdown to Isaac Bruce. After Jeff George was sacked on their next drive, the Vikings punted. After only 3 plays, Warner would have a second touchdown of the day, a 41-yard strike to Marshall Faulk. George and the Vikings would strike back, marching down the field before Chris Carter scored from 22 yards out, with 5:07 left in the second quarter. The score at this point was 14-10, with the Vikings primed to come and take the lead. However, on their next drive after a Rams punt, George would be intercepted by Dexter McLeon. However, the Vikings got the ball right back as Marshall Faulk fumbled the handoff. The Vikes would go down and score with 2:40 left in the half to take their first lead of the day. While the Rams tried to get in the field goal range, Kurt Warner would be sacked for a 9-yard loss by John Randall to push them out. The half would end with Minnesota leading 17-14. The Rams, though, would absolutely not be held down, as on the opening kickoff of the second half, return man Tony Horn would take the kick 95 yards for the touchdown. On the resulting Vikings drive, they would punt, leading to a suffocatingly long offensive masterpiece by the Rams that resulted in a 1-yard score from Marshall Faulk. The Vikings would punt again, and another long drive in the Rams resulted in a touchdown pass from Kurt Warner to tight end Jeff Robinson. The script had flipped immensely. After being down by 3, the Rams had scored 21 unanswered to go up 35-17 in the third quarter. Then, just one play after that third touchdown, Jeff George would fumble a snap, and it would be recovered by Rams D tackle DeMarco Farr at the Vikings 23. The Rams would go down that short field, and Warner would throw another touchdown, this time on a tackle-eligible play to offensive lineman Ryan Tucker. The Vikings would stall out again, and the Rams would go down the field once more. It would result in another Warner touchdown, this time to backup tight end Roland Williams. The Rams were now up 49-17, with only 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. But then, the Vikings offense woke up. Jeff George, who for at that point in the second half was 2 of 8 for -9 yards, started hitting his throws. First, a massive gain to Randy Moss, which resulted in a 4-yard touchdown pass to wideout Jake Reed. The Vikings attempted an onside kick and recovered, resulting in another pass, a 44-yard touchdown to Randy Moss. They would attempt another onside, fail, but the Rams would run 3 times and punt. Minnesota drove 85 yards in 16 plays, resulting in another touchdown pass to Moss. However, at this point, there were only about 35 seconds left in the game. Another onside attempt would fail, and the Rams would kneel the clock out, resulting in a final score of 49-37. The Rams would move on to the NFC Championship to face another tough foe, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This Tampa team was dangerous, very, very dangerous, but in the exact opposite way of the Rams. This was a defense-first team. Tony Dungy's legendary Tampa 2 system, with a bevy of talented players to elevate it and support it. Of course, in the middle of the line, the one and only Warren Sapp. Behind him, in the sort of midfield zone, plus the boundary area, was Derek Brooks, a linebacker whose speed and tenacity hounded teams in both the run and pass games. And of course, there was also legendary hard-hitting safety John Lynch, who was a terror for all that dared stand in his way in both the run and pass game. Throughout the season, this defense would hold opponents to 10 points or less 9 times. They also went on a 6-game win streak in the middle of the season. The team had 5 All-Pros that year, but only one was on the offensive side, that being fullback Mike Olstadt. The rest of the offense was... The running game on the team was pretty damn strong, with Mike Olstadt leading the way with 949 yards and 7 touchdowns. His partner in the backfield would be the ever underrated Warwick Dunn, who had 616 rushing yards, along with 589 receiving and 2 receiving touchdowns that year. However, their quarterback situation was in the gutter, let's say, really. Trent Dilfer was their slated starter for that year, but he would be benched after 10 games due to poor play for rookie Sean King. King didn't play well either, but he kept the offense afloat enough to stay out of the defense's way. The team would go 11-5 that season and get a bye week, being the second seed in the NFC. They would face Washington in the first round of the playoffs, and after going down 13-0, the offense would stumble their way into scoring 2 touchdowns in the second half of the game to win by a razor's edge, 14-13, to go on to face the Rams in the championship. The championship game itself would be dictated on the Bucs' terms, being a defensive slugfest. On the first play from scrimmage, Bucs defensive end Steve White intercepted a screen pass on the 20-yard line of the Rams. However, that offense came back to bite them, resulting in a field goal. The Rams would respond by putting together a vintage drive, 74 yards in 16 plays, and that would immediately be erased by another fumbled handoff. The Rams settled for 3, and those were the only points scored for the entire first quarter, a 3-3 tie. The second quarter started out terribly for the Bucs, as a high snap from center Tony Mayberry went over Sean King's head, and it was all he could do to knock it out of the end zone to prevent a touchdown. But the Rams still got their safety. The score was now 5-3 St. Louis. After a long exchange of offensive and defensive bumbles by both teams, the half ended with a score of 5-3. In the first drive of the second half, though, the Buccaneers would stumble their way down the field to get into field goal range, kick it, and take a 6-5 lead. Warner would also be intercepted twice by this defense, the second one of those two coming as a very, very costly play on the 3-yard line of the Buccaneers. The third quarter ended with a 6-5 lead by the Buccaneers. And after another series of offensive failures by both teams, the Rams got a lucky break, as King was intercepted by Dre Bly at the Buccaneers' 49-yard line. The Rams finally capitalized with good field position. They would score a touchdown, even. Warner throwing a 30-yard dart to wide receiver Ricky Prohl, who was sort of the only thing about the Rams offense that worked the game. He would finish with 6 receptions for 100 yards and a touchdown. But the Bucs would soon respond, driving deep into St. Louis territory, with only a minute 25 left in the game, before Sean King was sacked by defensive end Grant Wistrom. On the next play, King would throw an 11-yard strike to wide receiver Bert Emanuel. Or would he? The play would be replayed, ironically, and overturned, the ref saying that Emanuel never really had possession of the ball before it hit the ground. The Bucs protested vehemently after the championship game ended and into the offseason, which led the NFL to adopt the Bert Emanuel rule. The Bert Emanuel rule allows for a catch to still be called if a receiver maintains possession through the entire action, even if the ball hits the ground. After that, King would throw 2 straight incompletions and turn the ball over on downs. The Rams would win, and they were going to the Super Bowl, of course, to face Tennessee. We all know what's coming next, and that will be for part 3. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to try and be more consistent with my uploads, maybe around once a week, because I really like to put time into my research, but I also don't like to do editing, to be honest, and I have no idea what I'm doing, just so you know. There's your confidence in me for the day. But anyways, that's going to be it for me for now. Hopefully I see you again soon. Deuces.